And we started the whole series off with a quote from Rob Bell in his book, What We Talk About When We Talk About God. The quote says, "To deny this feeling of something more, something purposeful and intentional, is to insist that it's all random, accidental, and meaningless. And that just doesn't work for most people at a soul level. And you're probably here today because at some level it doesn't work for you, that all of this going on in life is meaningless, purposeless, and there's just nothing more to it than what we see. I think we all have this deep down inside of us where we think that there is something more. We said that what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So quote from A.W. Tozer, a 20th century theologian, he said that this is the most important thing about us. When we begin to think about God, what comes to our mind really matters. So we say kind of the core of this entire series, discussion series is this: is when we talk about God, we're having the most important conversations imaginable. And we believe that at a core level as a church, which is why we decided to create discussion groups within our services, our gatherings on Sunday. Because we believe so much so in the conversations about God, about life and faith, and how important they really are. But we only have words, right? We only have words when it comes to talking about God, and sometimes our words are limited, our metaphors fall short. And sometimes it's just incomplete, and it's very difficult to talk about God in a meaningful way. And so we're trying to provide some words for people and ways to talk about God that matter and help us have meaningful conversation. And so our crossword over here, our first word that we used was the word hum. And we said that a hum is an indicator of a source of something. If you hear the air conditioner kick on, you hear the hum, and the hum isn't the air conditioner, right? It's the indicator of the source. And we said that when we talk about God, we're discussing the source of all we feel to be true. And then we continued with some words, and we looked at our friend Pete Rollins, who's a modern-day scholar and philosopher. He took this construct of God of the imaginary, God of the symbolic, and God of the real. And we said, as we looked at that when we talk about God, we're discussing something personal, yet transcendent. A lot of times when we talk about God, we end up carrying this picture of God that looks an awful lot like us, right? Because He's a personal God, but we also see and can understand that to fathom a God, to fully understand God is impossible. He's transcendent, He's otherworldly, He is outside of our realm. He inserts Himself into our lives in a very personal way. And so we said that God the imaginary, God is symbolic, God the real. And again, you can look at all these past messages on YouTube if you're interested. You can go to our YouTube channel, Downtown Faith, and look at these. And so last week we decided to dive into what does the Bible have to say about God? Like what does the Bible have to say about God and how we can understand it? And a lot of people think the Bible is a rule book of sorts, or they look at it as maybe a textbook, or they look at it as just as ancient scriptures, but doesn't really fit into today. But we said that the Bible is the story of an ever-expanding awareness of God and how human beings might relate to the divine. And so the Bible is actually very important in helping us unfold and understand this God that is personal yet transcendent. We see that the earliest human beings who followed God understood God to be, and our word up there is for them. He was a God who was for them. He was this banner that went before them, that represented them, and they represented God. We said when we talk about God, we're discussing God who's on our side. And not on our side as in God picks sides, but on our side as in God loves you. He's for you. He has a purpose for you. We talk about it not being meaningless and purposeless, right? Like God has a purpose for you. God loves you. He wants to see you are flourishing in life. God is a God who's on our side. He is for us. We say that when we realize that God is for us, we begin to respond in faith, which is a belief and a behavior. Someone says they believe something, they don't behave accordingly. We look at them and we go, well, you're a hypocrite. Or we go, you don't really believe that, right? Faith is this belief and behavior together. And so we're going to continue to look into the Bible. We see this God for us, and we're going to see this next progression today. And we're going to look at Jesus. And we're going to see the next progression and a new word for our board here. But the thing that separates most religions from what we believe here, or what some would call Christianity, or what some would just call people who follow Jesus. That's what we tell people around here, is we follow Jesus and we want to help people do the same. We keep it pretty simple. A lot of the differences when it comes down to it is what people believe about Jesus. I hear it all the time in our pub theology discussion. We'll have a lot of different views there, and people will be like, well, you guys are all basically saying the same thing, right? Like you're all saying to be good, don't be mean, right? And like help people. And like you're all kind of saying the same thing. And so when it comes down to it, when it comes down to what you really believe, that is the separation of religions comes down to what do they say about Jesus? Like Islam, Jesus is the only sinless prophet. That's how they view Jesus as a prophet, but that he was the one who was able to achieve being a prophet in a perfect way. You look at the other monotheistic religion, Judaism, and they view Jesus was a heretic. And he said he was something that he was not. And what we would believe here is that Jesus was something special, and there was something different about him when he got here. Not that he achieved something when he was on earth, but that he was something different when he came to earth. And we see this in our modern culture. If you look at some research here from the Barna Group, there's a lot of research around faith when it comes to really globally. I know it's kind of maybe hard to read from where you are, but this one right here, it says basically people who believe that Jesus was perfect. Was he sinless? Or was he just like other people? He wasn't perfect. He got it wrong sometimes too. And we see as you go more and more into from the elders, boomers, Gen Xers to millennials, there's more and more understanding. Jesus was just kind of like everybody else. Right here we see was that believe Jesus was a real person who actually lived. Right? Historically, about 92% of all adults in America believe that Jesus was a historical, valid, real person. But again, as you go from elders, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, that actually shrinks. The number gets less and less, where our culture today is actually viewing Jesus less and less as even an actual historical figure. But this one over here is a big one. It's that I believe Jesus was, and there's one for just not sure, right? That may be where you are today. You're like, Jesus was, I don't know. Who knows? And then there's one here, this lighter shade here, is that he was only just a religious, spiritual teacher, right? He was a guru, he was just another spiritual, religious teacher. Maybe he was a good one, right? Like he got it right, but he was just a religious teacher. And then the black here is the people that believe Jesus was God. This is the separation when it comes to the differences in religion. Was Jesus God? I like to say this way, God in the Bible, right? Like, was that who Jesus was? Or was he just another good person? And again, in our American culture here, what we see is, as we get closer to millennials, we see a pulling away from an understanding of Jesus as God when he came to earth. Not that he achieved deity, godhood on earth, and then left, but that when he came to earth, when he was born, he had this essence of deity, that he was God. We see this pulling away in culture from Jesus being God and actually just being another good spiritual teacher. So this is actually a very important discussion to have. When we look at religion, when we are talking about God, is okay, what are we talking about when it comes down to Jesus? Who was Jesus? If this is the pivotal moment where we're figuring out what we believe, if this is the focal point, who is Jesus? And so there's a guy by the name of C.S. Lewis, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, those books guy, very well-known author. He became a follower of Jesus later on in his life, and he was a great thinker. And so he came up with this construct here. There's people who tried to poke holes in it, and it's very interesting. But he basically came down to this. Because Jesus, in our records, in the Gospels, what we have is because Jesus said he was God, that he was God, that he and the Father were of the same essence of deity, that makes him one of three things. First one, he's a liar. right? And you can't be a liar and a good religious spiritual teacher at the same time, right? Like, if you're a liar, people can't trust you. You're probably not a good, like, wait, I know a lot of religious teachers who are liars, right? But they're probably not good religious teachers, right? So if he was a liar, he was intentionally lying to people. He can't be God, and it's just the alternative of, well, he's a liar, so he's a good prophet. No. He's a liar, he's not good. A lunatic, right? Maybe he just thought he was God. You see it every now and then, right? You see the story of people that do some crazy things, and they are the Messiah, they are God, they were sent by God. You see this in our culture all the time. I remember my sister was actually doing her clinicals for nursing school when 9/11 happened. It was on the TVs, and she was in a medical facility for people who struggle with mental capacity. It's the best way to say that. And she said it was terrifying because everyone began to claim that this was them, that they were God, and they were causing this to happen, and people started really getting riled up, and there was this undertone of people saying that they were this thing, they were the rescue, they were this Messiah, they were this God that was making all this happen. And so we would understand, we would look at that, we would see that this mentally diminished person, we would say that they probably aren't right? So Jesus was going around saying to people that he was God, but he really wasn't, and he would be a lunatic, which also wouldn't make him a good religious spiritual teacher for us. And so he said the only logical explanation is he was one of those, so he can't be just a good guy. So you have to do something different, and that is, he alliterates it because it helps us think that way, but he was God, he was the Lord. There was something different about Jesus. Another guy came in later and he's like, well, it could just be all legend. But we see that historically, that Jesus was a person. We understand this. We have reliable historical writings that document the life of Jesus and the things that happened around Jesus and people that knew Jesus. And most Americans, 92% of all adult Americans, would say, yeah, Jesus was a real person. That he wasn't just the thing of myth and legend. So liar, lunatic, Lord, right? Who was Jesus? So I want to real quickly dive into the Gospel of John. Now, John, it's a great one to read if you really want to kind of dive further into it. John was the youngest of all the disciples. He wrote a Gospel, which is basically a biographical account of Jesus. But he also wrote some letters to the church. You'll find on the back of the New Testament, the back of the Bible, which we have some back there. Feel free to take one. YouVersion is a great Bible app to use. And he wrote some letters, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. He also wrote the book of Revelation. And so John, he was a disciple. He was one of the 12 disciples. And he was actually, there was 12, and then there was an inner circle of 3. And he was actually in that inner circle. And he was referred to as the disciple who Jesus loved. Right? Like there's a special relationship. Now, he's only referred to that in his writings. So maybe he just really felt a special connection to Jesus. No one else described him that way, but that's how he described himself. It's the disciple who Jesus loved. They had this special relationship. And if you look at the painting of the Last Supper, right, there's always this disciple, this leaning on Jesus, this sitting especially close to him. And that was John. And we find that in the Gospels, that he was especially close to Jesus. It's actually who Jesus, when he was dying, it's who he gave the care of his mother to, was John. And so we're going to look at what John said, who seemed to be especially close to Jesus. And I want to look at how did this person who walked with Jesus, who talked with Jesus, who had a friendship with Jesus, who experienced Jesus face to face, how did he describe Jesus? Right? And it's a great way to kind of go back and get some information about who is this Jesus and what might we believe about him. So let's go to the Gospel of John, right in the first chapter, right away. John says this. He says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. Okay, so we see a couple interesting things here. First off, in the beginning, which if maybe you're familiar with the Bible, Genesis, the very first book, starts off with in the beginning. Genesis means beginnings. And so he's kind of going back to this point, right? He's saying in the beginning, the Word. We're going to talk about this is very important, but keep that in mind. Okay, the Word is referring to Jesus. It's capitalized and referring to this person, Jesus. Already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay? So this is maybe a little deep to explain, right? So how was he with God and how was God as well? This is one of my, if I remember anything from my college days, it was our 3 days discussing this in theology class, right? I actually enjoyed those 3 days. I think it was the only 3 hours awake. The Word was with God, literally meaning he was in interaction with God, okay? So face-to-face interaction with God. But the Word was God, okay? So what we see here are 2 distinct persons, one distinct deity or essence of divinity. So Jesus, John says, was in the beginning. He already existed. I mean, he was with God and he was God at the same time. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him. We talk about this source of all we feel and see and know to be true comes from God. Okay? And he's saying that God actually used Jesus to create those things. And nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created. And his life brought light to everyone. And light there, metaphorically, meaning in truth, right? Light reveals truth. If you're in a room full of furniture and you don't have any light, you don't know what's in front of you, you don't know the truth. Light comes in and you begin to see the truth, the true layout of the room. And you can walk accordingly. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. So right away, we see something special about Jesus. And I want to talk about him being referred to as the Word here. Words are important. We talk about it. When we talk about God, we only have words, we only have metaphors. Words matter. We all understand that to be true. Right? Like, we can act like words don't hurt, but they do. We can act like words don't have power over how we think and do things, but they do. Words are important. Because words are it's how we reveal, it's how we express, it's how we communicate our thoughts, feelings, plans, actions, ideas. It's how we share to everyone what's going on inside of us, with the real us. We use words. So, Jesus was referred to as the Word because Jesus is the full expression of God's thoughts, plans, and actions and feelings towards mankind. This is why John refers to him as the Word. He is the full expression of God's thoughts, plans, actions, and feelings towards mankind. When we talk about God being for us, being on our side, this is lived out in the life of Jesus. He's the full expression. So let's continue to look at John here a little further down. In chapter 1, he actually talks about another guy named John for a little bit. When he comes back into talking about Jesus, he says, he came into the very world he created, but the world didn't recognize him. She's like, hey, he created everything. He came into it, like in the flesh, and the world didn't recognize him as creator. He came to his own people, so there was this special group of people, the Hebrews, the Jewish nation. And they had a covenant, a contract, an agreement with God. That they were going to be the place, the nation that God used to bring Jesus that was going to bless all other nations. And so he came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed him and accepted him, we do know that he had followers. He gave the right to become children of God. They are reborn, not with physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but a birth that comes from God. He kind of sums up here. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He put on flesh. The word there is the same word where we get like carne asada, incarnate, right? In flesh. So he was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. This is the most often used term to describe God in the Hebrew Scriptures. And it was how John summed up to describe Jesus. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. Basically, when we see Jesus, we see God, and when we follow Jesus, we follow God. When we see Jesus, we see God. When we follow Jesus, we follow God. Jesus is something different altogether. Somehow, he was God and human. He experienced people like we experience each other. He experienced the world around him like we experience the world around us. In Hebrew scriptures that prophesied about Jesus coming, and then what was used, actually, we hear a lot of times during Christmas time, what was told to Mary was this word Emmanuel, which means God with us, which actually helps us provide this other word is that we see God for us in the Old Testament. When we look at the Gospels and we see Jesus, we see a God that is with us. And we see that God wasn't content having this long distance relationship. He said, no, I'm going to send my son, Jesus, to do something a little different, to change the game. And when we talk about God, we're speaking of Jesus. If you sum it up, when we talk about God, we're speaking of Jesus. He's the game changer. We tell people that here at Downtown Faith, we want to help people follow Jesus into a new life. We believe life change happens through the person of Jesus. And we talked about understanding that God is for you leads you to faith in God. I believe that seeing that Jesus is with us, that Jesus was God, our response becomes trust. Because we begin to believe, place, and direct our belief towards Him. A.W. Tozer in his book, The Pursuit of God, which I highly recommend, it is phenomenal understanding of a very spiritual relationship with God. He says, faith is not a one-sided, but a continuous gaze of the heart at the triune God, being the three-person, one-deity God. We're talking about that next week. Believing then is directing the heart's attention to Jesus. Real faith is directing the heart's attention to Jesus. Following after God through this person who changed the game for all of us in Jesus.